Many of us don't know the reasons that make countries behave the way they do in the international theater. For example, why do countries engage in fierce wars when they know that war harms all belligerents, both winners and losers? On the other hand, what is the nature of the individual human being which the nation is based upon? History says that human nature is constant over time and has not changed. The nature of Genghis Khan is the same as the nature of Hitler or Winston Churchill, and the nature of Queen Victoria is the same as the nature of Julius Caesar or Donald Trump. Also, it is worth mentioning that what changes are the means and tools in addition to the behaviors that a person uses to satisfy his ends. There is an equation that says achieving ends equals using particular means plus acting in certain behaviors. Ends are constant, such as the lust for power and security, but it is the means and actions that change, such as weapons and war plans. Here's a list of what we'll talk about during this documentary. By nature, the individual human being is loner and selfish in his heart, while also arrogant and deeply insecure. He is always paranoid and terrified of the fluctuations of nature, plus his inability to predict its conditions. He does not like other humans and associates with them only if he tries to meet his personal needs that he can't reach on his own or out of fear of solitude. The individual human has many instincts, but the two most important ones are the survival instinct and the instinct of searching for meaning in life. If we're lucky, maybe one day we'll talk about the last instinct. For now, let's just focus on the first one. In the context of history, man has known three lifestyles. The oldest one is the hunting and gathering lifestyle. Then it came the agricultural lifestyle, and later came the industrial one. And each of these has its own laws, morals, and customs. In order to survive, the individual human used to hunt for food and gather what he could eat from nature. He hunted animals and killed them. Not to say that he's naturally cannibal, but if an animal was not available, he would eat another human being, otherwise he would starve to death. If he's lucky, he scavenges what is left of someone else's hunt. This lifestyle taught humans the behaviors of nomadism, random and barbaric killing, theft, and plundering, which were necessary virtues due to their effectiveness in achieving survival at that time. Therefore, in order to survive, he was constantly in a violent competition with other people and with the rest of the animals, which if given the chance, they would have eaten him alive. As the centuries passed, humans discovered agriculture by planting seeds, cultivating the soil, and domesticating animals. Majority of historians agree that the human females were the ones who discovered agriculture because they were not interested in hunting due to their weak physical structure compared to human males, given the enormous physical strength required for hunting. We do not know how the domestication of animals began. Perhaps when a person hunted a random savage animal, he took the slain beast's harmless babies, who had not yet reached the level of savagery, and brought them home to his spouse and kids in order to play with them. With agriculture, he discovered industry by using fire to cook his food and make his shelter warm, while manufacturing bowls and utensils from pottery and clay to facilitate eating. Then, people became more dependent on eating from plant sources, such as vegetables and fruits, and some of them for many decades forgot the fundamentals of indiscriminate hunting and abandoned the behaviors of killing and looting because they carried too many risks for the hunters themselves. From agriculture and industry, the human being learned new and peaceful behaviors such as industriousness, patience, and making concessions instead of taken by force. This helped soften his aggressive manners to a certain extent. And whenever he produced a surplus of food or any product that he did not need for personal use, he traded it with another type of commodity he needed. From here, the man learned the principles of trade and invented money as a tool to facilitate trade and preserve value. And in cooperation with his brothers, which again was out of necessity, he was able to establish cities and trading posts to stimulate commerce and the exchange of goods and services between individuals. Because the human being did not forget his individualistic nature, and with the agriculture and industrial patterns taking control of people's lives, competition between people has become most of the time non-violent, as competition has taken place between the owners of money and business by maximizing production, minimizing losses at the expense of the other, without resorting to killing each other and looting. With all this civilization and a tendency towards choosing a peaceful lifestyle in our current era, why do we still see killing, brutality, and war? First reason is because when natural disasters occur, such as droughts that destroy the livelihood of many people, which leads to the decrease of the production of goods and services, or when paranoia kicks into the insecure human mind, fearing the next disaster to come. A portion of people who belong to this civilized society, who also have been trained in martial arts and fighting, and who have not forgotten the legacy of their hunting ancestors, will resort to raiding other societies that are witnessing environmental stability plus industrial and agriculture prosperity, and wage wars on them. They kill and plunder their property and wealth in order to secure a living for their peers. Second reason is because humans always find stealing a product and killing its owners much easier than producing it, which is why the hunting lifestyle came before the agriculture and industry. Human beings compete in life for three main reasons. It is true that poverty builds character, but also leads to aggression. And because of our selfish nature, the poor nation won't expect handouts from other ones for free. It has to get them by its own hands. For example, Japan resorted to waging expansionist wars against the Kingdom of China in 1894, and Russia in 1904, and the Republic of China in 1931, seeking to control the basic natural resources that it lacked. Germany also resorted to expanding its territory by force in the 30s and 40s of the 20th century for several reasons, but the most prominent one was the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, signed after World War I, which has stripped Germany its colonial territories in Africa and Asia, which were the primary source of its resources and wealth. Fear is the mother of all greed, and barbarism is the book of its memories. As we mentioned previously, humans are naturally insecure, and you find them afraid of harsh conditions and trying day and night to secure themselves from every risk on God's green earth. And the biggest risks are resource depletion, natural disasters, and preemptive attacks from other nations. Therefore, it is natural to see people in times of crisis compete to buy food at supermarkets and store it at home out of fear of running out. And in return, those who do not obtain it suffer from hunger, as in pandemics and natural disasters. On the flip side, when people do not find a way to feed themselves peacefully in times of crisis, they will resort to violence in order to plunder and steal whatever they need. As for the fear of preemptive attacks from other nations, those who do have an advanced industrial bases and powerful militaries adopt expansionist policies at the expense of other weak nations and attack them preemptively, believing that the best tool for defense is taking offensive measurements, and the logic of "I must have my enemy for lunch before he will have me for dinner" as the best plan to achieve security. Not all wars were fought for food and security only. For example, wars of independence, such as the Algerian and American Wars of Independence, were fought for freedom from the control of other nations that were suppressing the identity of the Algerian and American people, where each one has its own culture, customs, and way of life. Wars of independence usually stem from the desire of people to free themselves and express their pride in their identity in front of the world without restrictions or conditions. In life, there are no more than 5 basic colors: red, blue, yellow, white, and black. As Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military leader and author of the famous book The Art of War, said, "In battle, there are no more than 2 methods of attack, direct and indirect." While we're talking about the nature of competition in life, there are no more than 2 types of competition: violent competition and the non-violent competition. It is worth mentioning that at the beginning of history, at first, competition was between individuals, then it developed and later became between families. After that, it developed and became between tribes and clans, then finally it became between nations. We exist in a time where nations compete against each other. We will discuss later the reasons why a random person, which carries an individualistic and selfish nature, as we previously explained, unites with other people like him to form tribes and nations. Violent competition is based on waging direct wars, proxy wars, and launching quick strikes. Non-violent competition in our current era has several names, most notably the Gray Zone competition or the Cold War. Non-violent competition is based on, first, striving towards self-sufficiency in order to decrease dependence on other nations. Second, economic coercion, like launching a trade blockade on another nation. Third, spreading false information on the enemy. Fourth, spying and stealing enemies' personal secrets. Sun Tzu highly praised non-violent competition and its tools, even though he was a military general, and declared that it was the best type of competition. As he said, "The highest skill is not to destroy your opponent. The highest skill is to subjugate him without any fighting." Both types of competition aim to either annihilate the enemy or subject his members to the desires of the victor. In other words, subjugate him. In reality, it is impossible to annihilate all the enemy's population, and with time, the victorious nation realized that keeping the defeated enemy's population alive and forcing them to serve it was more important and beneficial than killing them. It is absolutely wrong to say that non-violent tools are less harmful than violent tools. Take trade blockades, which is a non-violent tool. Prolonging its duration can lead to famine and in turn causes the death of many members of the enemy's population without any direct violent act. Because cooperation is the best tool that can be used to compete against other nations, wild creatures, and against the cruelty of nature. And because he cannot do it alone, primitive man cooperated with his brothers to hunt huge beasts in order to eat. And when he discovered agriculture, he cooperated with them in order to cultivate the land. And with the development of human life and the development of civilizations, he used cooperation in all aspects of life. American philosopher Will Durant said in his book, Lessons from History. So the first biological lesson of history is that life is competition. Competition is not only the life of trade, it is the trade of life. Peaceful when food abounds, violent when the mouths outrun the food. Animals eat one another without qualm. Civilized men consume one another by due process of law. Cooperation is real and increases with social development, but mostly because it is a tool and form of competition. We cooperate in our group, our family, community, club, church, party, race, or nation in order to strengthen our group in its competition with other groups. We can see that cooperation developed throughout human history. Primitive man cooperated with other people until they formed a family. Then the family cooperated with other families until they formed a tribe. After that, the tribe cooperated with neighboring tribes until they formed a nation. and finally the nation cooperated with other nations until they formed alliances, blocs, and so on. Because the individual human being is limited in his abilities, he must cooperate with other people in order to be able to compete against his enemies. And despite his cruel and selfish nature, when cooperation succeeds between members of the nation, feelings of familiarity, unity, and loyalty begin to develop between them until some individuals reach the point of sacrificing themselves for the sake of nation's survival. In order for cooperation to be successful and continuous between individuals of the same nation, they need to follow these instructions. The goal of establishing a code of conduct is to stimulate behaviors that strengthen cooperation between individuals and suppress those that weaken it. History tells us that laws, morals, and ethics don't have a constant nature, but rather change. What was considered a vice yesterday may today have become a virtue and vice versa. For example, homosexuality in the West was considered a sin and sometimes a crime. Today, many are celebrating it in the streets.
I mean this from all my heart. Marriage is a simple proposition. Who do you love? And will you be loyal to that person you love? It's not more complicated than that. The law recognizes that everyone should have the right to answer those questions for themselves without the government interference. It also secures the federal rights, protections that come with marriage. Like when your loved one gets sick and you've legally recognized as a next of kin. For most of our nation's history, we denied interracial couples and same-sex couples from these protections. We failed to treat them with equal dignity and respect.
Factors that shape laws are climatic conditions, technological inventions, and lifestyle changes. For example, when agriculture was invented, hunting some types of animals became prohibited in some legal codes. History also tells us that the issue of morality is subjective. Each nation has its own perspective on what's good and evil, since the human beings live in different circumstances and have different objectives and are naturally competitive and selfish. So it is natural to see different moral values. For example, some people see the armed group Hamas as terrorists.
The bloody hands of the terrorist organization Hamas, a group whose stated purpose for being is to kill Jews. This was an act of sheer evil.
And some see them as freedom fighters.
Ve Hamas bir terör örgütü değil, topraklarını ve vatandaşlarını koruma mücadelesi veren, evet, bir kurtuluş ve bir mücahitler grubu.
Therefore, it is false to say that all morals have a universal value. Throughout history, the central force has had several names, but in our current era, it is called the government. The government's main roles are first to unify the mechanisms of decision-making related to the cooperation of individuals, as there will be no effective cooperation without making unified decisions. Second, making decisions that concern the nation, such as establishing certain rules and declaring wars on other nations. Third, controlling the behavior of individuals by rewarding them when they comply with the rules and punishing them when they violate the rules through a judicial system. Fourth is providing basic needs for individuals who cannot provide them by themselves, such as security, as a person cannot guarantee his security alone without someone helping him. Fifth is monitoring the public opinion of individuals in order to gain their support for its decisions, as they can't always be passed by force. If coercion prevails over consensus to a very high degree, then you are planting the seeds of rebellion and disobedience in front of your garden. If social discrimination becomes extremely obvious among individuals, The marginalized party will disobey the laws and rebel against them when given the opportunity. Thus, the principles of cooperation between individuals on which the nation relies on get broken. It does not matter the size of the influence of the central power, which we call the government, because if a person has nothing left to lose, then he will not be afraid of any deterrent system. If the government is unable to guarantee a certain level of justice, then rebellion begins to emerge. As we said previously, the main reason for people's unity and cooperation is to compete with other creatures and other nations. An individual human being cannot compete alone against a giant lion, nor he can defeat 10 men alone. Because human nature is so competitive and selfish, he gets more excited when he's challenged by adversity or an enemy, and starts to seek allies in order to help him defeat it. The feeling of patriotism and unity within the members of the same nation is always high when they are involved in a war or in a sporting event. In other words, when people are involved in a competition against other nations. When competition ceases to exist, there is no reason for cooperation to take place. Long story short, competition against other nations encourages cooperation. Absence of the competition encourages individualism. Perhaps many of us do not understand this question. Are there really winners and losers from a history perspective? We have previously known that survival requires competition between individuals and nations. If we assume that life has no meaning and without any significant importance, which is the point of view of many philosophers and even simple-minded people, then competition between nations is nothing but a game in which people compete over who will survive for the longest time possible. Perhaps many people say, "How dare you say that life is a game when wars are fought and people die and suffer?" Firstly, there are many games where people consider it silly in which a contender can be killed, such as boxing and MMA. Secondly, this is a point of view of many politicians, as they fail to take life seriously, and thus they throw their subordinates into fighting deadly wars for the sake of a game against other senior politicians of the competing nations. Perhaps this answer is a hard pill for people to swallow and accept, but what can be done? It is what it is. If life is a game, then there must be a winner and loser based on each one's historical performance on the international theater. The winner is the one who achieves survival at the expense of the loser by erasing the latter from existence. In other political words, the winning nation is the one who achieves survival at the expense of the losing nation by making it disappear. The Islamic Caliphate, with its various names, won when it eliminated the Sassanid Empire from existence, and the Ottoman Empire lost when it collapsed and disappeared after World War I. Also, the Soviet Union lost to the United States of America in the Cold War when it collapsed and disappeared as well in 1991. But someone says, if you read history, you would see that every nation that succeeded in swallowing up other ones along the way, in turn, lost to another nation at some point in time and disappeared. The British Empire, on which the sun never sets, after it swallowed several nations including India, lost most of its territories to new fresh nations after World War II. Likewise, after the Ottomans succeeded in erasing the Byzantine Empire from existence in 1453, their turn came in 1923 and were wiped out of the map. And so is the cycle of life. We all gotta go sometime, and each of us has a certain deadline. And when it is expired, the angel of death comes and takes us with him, both individuals and nations. Based on this conclusion, we can also say that the current nations such as America, India, China, Australia, Sweden, and others will also one day disappear, and new societies will take their place with other names. A wise politician cannot be depressed when he realizes that his nation, which he spent his life serving its cause and perhaps sacrificed everything he had for its survival, will disappear in the future. he certainly knows that his body will die one day, and he may accept and embrace this statement with open arms. So how can he be mad about the disappearance of his nation, which is not an organ of his own body? Every nation that fought for its survival, whether it won or lost the game, entered history with letters of gold and points of silver, and historians write about it with luxurious peacock feathers, and this is the biggest win. The great victory is not winning the game. Victory is that you entered history by rising up into a courageous situation no matter the outcome, whether you win or you lose. For example, from a basketball point of view, no sports pundit can say that players like Buckley, McGrady, Ewing, or Iverson, who have never succeeded in winning the NBA title, not even once, and they tried everything to get it, are losers. All sports critiques mention them positively and as one of the best to ever play basketball. Likewise, in the Game of Nations, Napoleon's loss in the Battle of Waterloo, which led to his demise, cannot hide his previous winning streaks in Austerlitz, Naples, and Vienna. Plus, saying that the previous empires, such as the Romans, Ottomans, and the Soviets, have completely disappeared is not entirely true. It is true that their political entity and their name in current geography have disappeared altogether, but their legacy is still alive. Their laws, their way of life, the buildings they built, and perhaps the currencies they used in trading still exist to this day, and some of us admire them to the point of madness and try day and night to study their characteristics, hoping that perhaps we'll take from them what will benefit our lives. Every past nation or empire that once existed and left its mark cannot be removed from history books. Therefore, every nation that left a mark, even if its political entity and name in modern geography have disappeared altogether, is considered a winner from a history perspective. In short, all previous nations and empires of history did lose the game of survival, but won history by leaving physical marks such as buildings and intangible marks such as traditions and manners, which is far more important than the game itself.